that he is no longer getting good information about what is happening in the world or even his own country. And one of the results of this are extreme policy mismatches. He says he wants clean skies, so they shut down coal. He says that he doesn't want debt-driven development, so they shut down building. But that has generated electricity shortages. Now, those shortages last year, they started in April. But it is not apparent that Xi found out about them until September, and we didn't get our first real policy to address them until November. So China is still going through rolling brownouts and blackouts on parts of the country that roughly add up to about 1/3 of GDP. And in this sort of disconnect, the real problem in today's environment is that the Chinese vaccines don't work. Well, maybe they worked pretty well against the original strain, about 55% effectiveness at preventing death and severe disease versus the original strain out of Wuhan. But that vanished with Delta, and against Omicron, they're barely functional at all. So China has followed a similar zero COVID policy to the rest of East Asia, but they can't open up because they can't give their people a vaccine that actually protects them. So you should expect to see more and more disruptions out of China in terms of supply chain, because Omicron is not the original strain. It is far more communicable, 4 times as communicable. And the only tool that the Chinese have for dealing with it is to shut everything down. So you should expect this to last until China chooses to admit in both its policy and its medical work on the vaccines that everything was just flawed, and they're going to bring in 3 billion doses from the United States. You think that's going to happen this year? Or next year? Or ever? And so we're seeing progressively more problematic lockdowns. In late November, this is the port of Ningbo, it basically shut down. They've been operating at less than 1/3 capacity ever since. This is the port that doubles as not just the primary port for Shanghai, but for the entire Yangtze watershed, the most economically viable, the highest value-added part of the Chinese economy. Zero tolerance means that it can't function in the way it's become used to. Now, if you're in China, and the government has come to the conclusion that it cannot provide its citizens with growth, with jobs, with health, with electricity, then in a cult of personality, we know where this goes. We've seen it before. Raging, ethnic-centered ultranationalism of the Nazi style. When you think about what's been going on in China the last couple of years, the Hong Kong crackdown, Wolf Warrior foreign policy, the actions against the Michaels, the horrors of Zhejiang, these are all part of an effort to shift the attention of the average Chinese citizen from the economic to the political, to have people focus on the things that Xi can actually control. So how do you deal with this if you're outside of China, if you're concerned with supply? Well, there's 2 things you can do, and one of them, Canada has already been very well on its way to achieving. Vaccinate everybody. At a minimum, that will stabilize your own demand profile. And the second thing you can do is just move on. Stop counting on China writ large. Preference supply chains within North America. Now, this isn't as difficult as you think. I have not seen a study done in the last 3 years that suggests anything other than this. If you run a supply chain in East Asia versus North America, the North American one will be cheaper. The labor is higher skilled, the infrastructure is better, the interconnectivity is better, the transport distance among the supply chain steps is less, the number of international multimodal shipments you have to make is lower, and the end consumer is closer to the manufacturing supply chain system. You have to build the industrial plant. That's not free, and that's the only reason why we still talk about China at all. But as Westerners, we've always known this relationship was going to implode for reasons of politics, trade, populism, workforce, environment, ethics. We've always known it was going to end. And so you have a choice to make. Do you expend the cost now of seeking replacement systems before the relationship fully collapses? Or do you hold on to the supply system as it is, and hope that somehow, some way, it gets better down the road, and then be caught out when it finally collapses. That's the choice. And we are seeing more and more manufacturers in North America go with option A every day. Canada, the United States, and Mexico are all going through the fastest industrialization in their history. The question is whether it's fast enough. Now, for those of you who have seen me before, this will look familiar. These are the two things that dominate most of my work. Let's start with the flags. Before World War II, the world was imperial. You had a series of sequestered imperial systems that fought among themselves. They did not allow parts of their manufacturing system to be in a rival or even a partner, because if something went wrong somewhere, anytime, anywhere, you could lose access to whatever it was in the system that you needed to function. So it was all kept in-house. These competing systems ultimately led to World War II. And at the end of the war, the Americans tried something different. We drew our allies together at Bretton Woods, and we said that we were going to use our navies to patrol the oceans for everyone, so that anyone could go anywhere at any time and interface with any partner, access any commodity, participate in any supply chain, and sell into any end market. If in exchange, we could write your security policies versus the Soviets. We bought an alliance. And we know this is free trade, and we know this is NATO, and we know this is globalization. But the Cold War ended 30 years ago, and in the last 9 American presidential elections, the guy who wanted an internationalized system lost. And in this last race, there wasn't even a globalist in the race. Americans are done. Second, the graphics with the Canadian flags on them. These are demographic profiles. Children at the bottom, young adults, retirees at the top. Mortality tends to build it into a pyramid like you have on the left with Canada in 1965. Now, this is a normal profile. And whenever you have your bulge below roughly age 40, it's all about consumption as people spend money on cars and kids and college and homes. A system like Canada in 1965 is very high octane for growth. All that consumption is what drives most systems. It also tends to be mildly inflationary because people are consuming more than they can produce. But if you fast forward to 2020, the graphic on the right, the picture's changed. And it's changed in large part because of globalization. See, when globalization happened in the late 1940s, it brought the technologies of industrialization with it. And we all moved off the farm and we all moved into town. And when you do that, you have fewer kids. And if you fast forward 60 years, you start running out of 60-somethings. So in Canada, industrialization for the most part was completed by 1970, and that's when the bottom fell out of the Canadian birth rate. So Canada today is running out of 50-year-olds. They've already run out of 40-year-olds and 30-year-olds and 20-year-olds and teens. And the only reason that the Canadian demography doesn't collapse in on itself is Canada is the most pro-immigration country on earth.